Hi everyone, Teddy Baldassarre here in Schaffhausen, joined by the CEO of IWC, Chris Grainger. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Teddy. Hi.
Don't leave me hanging there.
Not at all.
Well, great to see you. Great to see you. So what I want this video to be is really going through the details of the IWC collection. If you're somebody that's new to the brand, where can I look? What do I need to understand from a high level before I dig deeper? So maybe as a point to begin, we're here in Schaffhausen. This is not necessarily known the same way as maybe like the Valley de Joux. I mean, you had to develop this, and IWC was so involved in the development of this region. So maybe start there with talking a little bit more about the facility, and then also Schaffhausen in general and like the philosophy around watchmaking.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Teddy. Thank you for coming. Thank you for this opportunity. I think what's interesting is that our founder, the American F.A. Jones, was an engineer. So he didn't come from a métier d'art artisanal watchmaking perspective, but from a purposeful industrial watchmaking perspective, trained in the American system of watchmaking in Boston, and then coming across the Atlantic, age 27, not speaking a word of French and German, and actually setting up the International Watch Company here in Schaffhausen to produce these high craftsmanship quality Swiss pocket watch movements for the American market. So his focus from the beginning was on instrument and tool watches. So the heritage is all in navigation watches, later aviation watches, then racing and diving watches, and it's always been about something that is pure instrument watch, that is ingenious but robust and easy to use. And this is, I think, the common thread that goes through all of our collections, where you have simple designs, open dials, and ingenious mechanisms that actually are designed for everyday purposeful use and that are quite user-friendly. And we'll see that throughout the different watches we're showing.
Yeah, with that, I think we can segue to starting with the Pilot series. If you're talking about form and really a core tenet of your brand, it would be your Pilot watches dating back to the 1930s, where this really started to become a development. But here we have the Mark series.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Mark series is based off originally our first ever pilot's watch back in 1936. We had the Homburger family. They were civilian and military pilots, and one of the Homburger sons actually asked their dad in 1936 to make a special watch for pilots, and that's really how our aviation legacy began. And the Mark watch is a direct descendant of the Mark 11. We started manufacturing in 1948 for the Royal Air Force, and this was really a pilot's watch for the Royal and their associated air forces around the Commonwealth. And we've made the original Mark 11, I think, from 1948 into the 1980s, and now we're up to Mark 20, so quite a lot later.
Skipped a couple numbers in between,
But really, this is very archetypical classic sports watch. It's sort of very clear, easy to read dials, full numerals, and then comes in this very beautiful aviation-inspired case. And if you're going to go for one IWC that has that DNA in it, I still think the Mark 20 is a perfect choice. 40 millimeters, all the main dial colors, bracelet or strap.
And this was updated in the last few years from the Mark 18, now getting 100 meters of water resistance. You're getting the 32,000 series of calibers with that 5-day reserve. Exactly. And then this on a bracelet, I think, is actually fantastic too. I really like it.
Yeah, and again, it's a really unique bracelet with fine adjustments. So you've got this 5mm adjustability.
Yeah, the hidden button, IWC button.
Hidden IWC button. You've got a nice fold-over clasp here. You've got partly polished, partly satin links in that 5-link bracelet, all individually assembled by hand. So it's a beautiful watch.
So if you're looking for that entry point for the instrument side of your collection, this would be that point. But then you have chronographs that exist here as well, but this is another point maybe we should talk about, Ceratanium. So what is Ceratanium for those that are not familiar with it?
Yeah, so IWC has always been about these performance materials. And I spoke to you just now about this idea of robustness. And this started for us really in 1985 with making the first full titanium wristwatch in the Porsche design chronograph, and went on to our first watches in ceramic in 1986. And then introducing ceramic into the pilots under Günther Blümlein in 1994 with that legendary 3705 ceramic chronograph. And since then, these materials have really been key to us. But then, of course, ceramic, very scratch resistant, but has to be constructed in a way that if you drop it, it doesn't actually fracture. And titanium being very light and very robust and very good material for case making, though difficult to machine, but in the end hasn't quite the surface hardness of ceramics. And we really tried with Ceratanium to invent something that combines both. What we have is a ceramized titanium, gets machined like titanium and then fired at high temperature to develop this really dark gunmetal permanent finish. And it's not a coating, this is actually deep into the material. Imagine a little bit like baking bread. The longer you bake it, the deeper that crust is going to be, the thicker the crust is going to be. And in the end, you have the surface hardness of ceramic combined with that lightness and that integrity of titanium. And it's something proprietary we're really proud of. And it really mainly features in our Top Gun series of watches. So off that simple mark design, we're going into chronographs, double chronographs, and further complications. And this this is a 41 millimeter Ceratanium. IWC manufactured 69 caliber, which is made right here in our facility in Schaffhausen. Sapphire glass case back on that beautiful textile inlay strap. It's a fantastic sports watch. Just if you're looking for day date, chronograph, and a sort of tactical look, it's just perfect.
And the Pilot Chrono can come in many different flavors, stainless steel, different case materials, and case sizes.
Yeah, all the way from sort of the idea with these aviation watches is always there's kind of the vintage military editions. So in the Spitfire and Spitfire Bronze, you have this kind of aviation heritage look and feel, all the way to a Lake Tahoe white ceramic chronograph where you have a very modern sports watch kind of look and feel to the pilot's watch.
So another pillar we have to talk about when you're talking about instruments, this is a watch that, like the 2000s when the 5002 was released, I don't even know that you could imagine like the success of this watch even at that time. This is the Big Pilot here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Big Pilot is based on an observation watch from 1940. So this was really an idea that aviators would wear these strapped over their overalls. The original Big Pilot from 1940 is actually 55 millimeter in diameter. It's a huge watch. And they weren't owned by the pilots as such. They were actually handed out to the crews for every mission. They were synchronized before the mission, worn over the straps, and then used for navigation to actually record precise time. That's why the oversized design. Also back in the day, the bigger the movement was, the higher the reliability and the precision was. And that's really given that watch its identity. Re-released in 2002 in 46 millimeters. That's really become a mainstay of our pilot's collection. And look with that iconic crown, the rivets on the strap, making this really a tool watch that is both elegant and refined, but really so essential to when it comes to this expression of kind of the rugged tool watch.
And if you're looking at pilot watches just as an entire industry, the design style of what we see, like orientation triangle, bold markers, like that Type A style dial, you were absolutely just so inspirational in that point, like in driving that design forward so that other brands would follow. So this is a real part of your heritage.
And the backbone for us has always been professional aviation. So even today, we're the biggest licensor of the US Navy Aviation Wing and the US Marine Corps. We cover all of the active duty and inactive squadrons. We cover the wings, we cover the Blue Angels, we cover Top Gun. And it's always that work with professional aviators and that feedback we get that ultimately informs and inspires every single commercial watch that we make.
So another historical line is the Portuguese, or the Portugieser as it is known here that we're looking at next. And we're looking at a chronograph version at 41 millimeters. Tell us more.
Yeah, this is one of those designs that IWC is really known for. The Portugieser has a really unique background story because in 1939 it was two Portuguese watch importers that came to Schaffhausen and said, look, we'd like a wristwatch with marine chronometer precision. And the only way we could do it back in the day is to put a pocket watch movement into a wristwatch. And that gave it this 40 millimeter oversized design. And I think it's really striking that with the very first Portugieser all the way to the modern Portugieser Automatic 40 and the chronograph, it really is the same DNA. So you have that great consistency in the line. And then in the mid-1990s, first in the Rattrapant double chronograph and later in the chronograph, that Portugieser chrono design was invented. And again, it speaks to IWC's navigation watch history because you have such a open, clean and precise dial with that huge bezel opening that makes the watch appear larger than it actually is. And combining that again with our IWC manufactured 69 caliber chronograph movement, the 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock layout, which is very unique in the industry, and just that balance between the clarity of an instrument but the understatement of something that's really puristic, just makes that both for men and for ladies just an evergreen. That's really one of the mainstays of our Portugieser collection.
Yeah, and if you look at chronographs, especially at this price segment, the vertical layout of the registers is typically something you don't see, and then when you can mirror that with like the balance of symmetry, which I think you've done exceptionally. With
the tricky thing is that typically you need the space at 12 o'clock for the barrel. That's why a lot of chronographs choose that smiley layout where the 12 o'clock position is without a sub-counter, because that's in terms of height is easier to construct. We've always gone for chronograph readability first. So when you look at our free counter chronographs as well, with the chrono indication at 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock, we've always gone for prioritizing the functional counters and making sure that really, form does follow function in this case.
Yeah, and then you have multiple different dial colors to choose from here. For pretty much every color of the rainbow you can pick out for those who don't.
Almost, yes.
Yeah, almost. Not quite.
Materials, versions, colors for sure.
Now this is a bit of a departure from what we've seen thus far. Now we shift to the Portofino, and you started with something so utilitarian with the mark, and then you have this understated elegance with the Portofino. Tell us a little bit more about the Portofino and also just like the philosophy, like what this collection represents.
Yeah, the Portofino is our most classic dress watch, really, out of all the watch families that we have, and also has the biggest component of ladies' watches. You know, in the Portofino 34, 35, and 37s, the day and night complications, really a watch that is very popular with the lady segment when it comes to the more sportier watches, which of course are predominantly more appealing to men. Now, the Portofino is based on this idea of a classic pocket watch layout. So it has these attached lugs, it has a very round case shape reminiscent of pocket watch layout, and again, very open, clean dials. When you see at the moon phase integration and all of the sub-counters we have on different Portofino models, it always follows the idea of an original pocket watch. Now, Portofino, I think it really came from this idea in the 1980s that there was a big fascination in Europe with this Italian Riviera lifestyle, and I think this is the starting point probably of Portofino. But it's the DNA of the pocket watch encapsulated in a very classic dress watch.
And variety of case sizes to choose from for both men and women for that collection, and serves as an entry point for the brand as you start to look at some of the mechanical options there.
Exactly.
And then as we transition, we had a lot of pilot, aviation inspiration, but there's also this dive watch history also that we have to mention about IWC.
So again, this is sort of a half military, half civilian sort of heritage in IWC, but the Aquatimer, really our version of a bezel dive watch that has a little bit of a difference in terms of that being an external bezel that drives an internal indication bezel. And the reason why that's important is because we can use lume on the internal bezel, protected from the water, but you're actually operating the bezel externally. It's got a one-directional clutch, so it actually runs free one direction, and you can only shorten the dive time, not extend it, which is quite useful when you're underwater. And then you have really that quite complex clutch system which translates that external bezel movement through the 300 meter waterproofing case onto the internal bezel. It's quite a complex case to machine, quite a complex mechanism to design, and I think again it's just one of those really puristic tool watches that harks back to this idea of the Ocean 500 and Ocean 2000, probably the Porsche design era as well, where you had very purposeful tool watches both worn by professional divers and by leisure divers alike.
And then there's a lot of compressor style cases in the industry. I think the thing that's unique here is not having an external crown that's actually used to rotate that elapsed time bezels. I think that's a little different as well. Now, I think one of the biggest developments in the last 5 years for IWC, there's been all of this clamoring around Ingenieur. Ingenieur, when is it coming back? When is it coming back? And a couple years ago, we got our answer, and where you looked was a part of your catalog back to the 1970s with the Genta connection, looking at the SL model with the new and improved Ingenieur modern generation.
You know, 1976 was really a turning point in the watch industry as the industry and the taste went away from purely gold luxury watches into creating actual steel watches and sportier designs. So during that time, really, it was Gerald Genta. He was an artist, but an eminent watch designer. He designed the Nautilus for Patek Philippe and the Royal Oak for Audemars Piguet, and his only round design out of the three, the Ingenieur in 1976, same year that Patek launched. And that was really the starting point for our sort of sports watch DNA in IWC, I would say, and also the only integrated bracelet collection we actually had naturally. Now, this wasn't the first Ingenieur. That actually started in 1955 as an anti-magnetic watch. Albert Peloton, gentleman behind us, they're heavily involved in that development, and sort of, the first sort of anti-magnetic tool watch, but in a very classic round case. And then Gerald came along, and the starting point here was, again, in the briefing, not a luxury watch, but actually a tool watch. So we said to Gerald, my predecessor said to Gerald to maintain that anti-magnetic property in the case and to make something that was really based off the idea of the Mark 11 as a tool watch. And you will even see some Ingenieurs from that generation that actually have a pilot's dial on. It's quite interesting how that relates. And then you have this idea of really the functional bezel that is a separate part and this case that flows really beautifully into the bracelet. And the Ingenieur having this idea of sort of rounded angles coming together. So it's quite a round archetypical watch design, but then you have these shoulders and those angles that give it a bit of edge as well. Right? And this really was a challenge after many generations of Ingenieur, and also the family lying more or less dormant for a number of years, is to get this out of the cryo chamber of watch design and really make something that is a modern sports watch, but faithful to Genta's original DNA. We're very lucky to be supported by his wife, Evelyn Genta, and the Genta Heritage Foundation in bringing this back to life, checking the archives, getting her validation, and a couple of years ago, very happy to reintroduce the Ingenieur automatic 40mm, anti-magnetic caliber 32, great dimensions in 40mm, wearing beautifully on the wrist, and now we've extended this family into complication sizes, materials, and so on, and it's a process.
Yeah, here we're looking at the standard 40mm version. You mentioned the soft iron cage, so still having that Ingenieur identity even to this day, and beautiful watches as well. And then for the final stop for us, Chris, I want to talk a little bit more about this other aspect of your identity, high complication, but also just innovation in material and what is being done with the winding system for this. So we're looking at a perpetual calendar. Now, perpetual calendar, we have some gentlemen behind us that have contributed to this final result, but I think one name, if you know IWC, is Kurt Klaus. So I want to talk a little bit more about your perpetual calendars. And one thing I always bring up when talking about perpetual calendars is if a brand like JLC had used your perpetuals, probably means that you're doing something right, that when the watchmaker's watchmaker is doing that. So tell us more about this watch specifically, and maybe the legacy of your perpetuals, because this is decades in the making to get here.
Exactly, so this is really close to our heart, I think very much our DNA. You mentioned Kurt Klaus, yes, he was our technical director back in the 80s, and imagine this was the depth of the quartz crisis, you know, affordable timekeeping, functional timekeeping coming in from Asia, making a lot of Swiss watches that were purely worn for timekeeping sort of obsolete. And the industry had to reinvent itself into what it is today, which is basically a luxury industry that talks about identity, talks about meaning, talks about, you know, your personal values being reflected on your wrist. And during that time, I think Kurt sat down and said, okay, let's readdress the collector's market in watches and design a perpetual calendar. A perpetual calendar wasn't a new concept, and the idea of being able to account for leap years and show fully the day, the date, the day of the week, the month, and the year in 4-digit display plus the moon phase. But Kurt's approach was to say, I don't want something that is geared by hundreds of different gears and levers. I want something that really can be adjusted just via the single crown, and that essentially has a mechanical program wheel computer that will feed all of the calendar information to the movement in a very different way compared to what's in the market. And he took 5 years to develop his version of the perpetual calendar with this very, very iconic layout. He also introduced this idea later on of the moon phase being shown for the northern and southern hemispheres. So you have a dual cigar cutter type moon display. And I think this launched at Basel World in 1985, the Basel Watch Fair. We expected to sell a couple back in the day, and I think we received 500 orders. And my predecessors, I think, had to go to the bank in Schaffhausen to pick up a loan to even buy the gold. You know, this is how tiny IWC was back in the day.
Wow.
And this has become really a staple of what we do, that ingenious Kurt Klaus calendar really encapsulates this idea of being ingenious, but being robust and being user-friendly. I mean, it's all there. And then when you see that here we have it in a Portugieser case, but we also do this in a sports watch like the Big Pilot in ceramic. So you have a watch that is haute horlogerie, but it can be worn every single day. And since then, we have continually pushed the limits. And I think last year we've seen the launch of the Portugieser Eternal calendar, which is a secular calendar, accounting not only for the leap years, but accounting for the leap year exceptions as well. So in years like 2100, 200, 300, there should be a leap year, but in our Gregorian calendar, there isn't. And the Eternal calendar uses an intricately manufactured 400-year gear, which rotates once only every 400 years, and that feeds the calendar the leap year exceptions to know to skip the leap year in 2100, which makes it run to the year 4000, and then we haven't decided yet as humanity whether we have a leap year or not. And we've also improved the moon phase from 570 years accuracy to 45 million, which is a Guinness World Record. So there we go.
And one of the challenges with perpetuals, when I always talk to collectors, is it's always a pain to set it. I don't want to have to deal with that. Like this negates all of that. There's no external pushers. Everything is programmed, so you just change. You change it to set your date there, and then everything else will just be mechanically calibrated to follow that to the year 2100 in this case.
Just a couple of rotations, you skip an entire day, including moon phase adjustments. So it's very intuitive to set. And then also, we've been able to relaunch this last year in a very unique new case design and dial design. So we added a couple of different colors. You see that huge opening for caliber 52 in the back. So this case has a double box glass, so it's actually optimized for a more slender side profile, and you're really showing off every element of that gold rotor, of the ceramic components. You mentioned the peloton winding, bidirectional winding, Albert Peloton behind us. You see the twin barrels here with that big bridge. It's a beautiful movement, and it's never been shown off like this ever in a Portugieser case. And then you have the dial, and the dial again is a obsidian black dial, we call it, and it features 15 layers of clear lacquer that's individually applied, dried, and so on to get this beautiful depth effect where the dial is not just black, but it gives you a bit of cognac, it gives you a bit of ardoise grey, and in the end you get a really rich play, and through this box glass it just opens up that instrument dial in a way we've never been able to do before. So very proud of this one.
And it's a powerhouse of a movement. I mean, the movement itself is just shy of 38 millimeters in diameter. I mean, filling up that whole reverse side, and it's this fusion of, you have the Kurt Klaus era, but then you also have the Albert Peloton era as well. And they had a short period where they actually interacted with one another another, and it was like the protege. Kurt Klaus was the protege of Albert Peloton in a way, where you were working together here.
Yeah,
right?
Albert Peloton was a heavyweight in the watch industry. Yeah. I think, with his legacy at Vacheron and others, he was really a technical director through and through. And Kurt Klaus, as his apprentice, I suppose at the time, really carrying that forward into the Günther Blümlein area and ultimately into the modern day, where you see these gentlemen's legacy and the impact they've made on who we are as a watch company is present in every single watchmaker today and every single engineer. And if you meet people like Markus Bühler, who's one of our key technical people today, you can really see the continuity with the spirit of Kurt Klaus and Albert Peloton. And it's the passion in Markus. It's specific. You couldn't have this in any other watch company. It's very IWC.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for walking us through the products from a high level. And this is just a small sampling, by the way. I mean, this is just scratching the surface for IWC, but thank you so much for sitting down and walking us through it.
Thank you so much, Teddy. Good to see you.
Likewise.
Thank you.